So let's go ahead and start with your note sheet. So you should have the note sheet that begins with invertebrates. Again, we said that there are 34 phyla of invertebrates in the animal kingdom. All invertebrates share basic characteristics. They don't have backbones or internal skeletons. Some invertebrates have exoskeletons. Not all, but some have exoskeletons. Hold on a second. Gotta get my sound on. A little video about invertebrates here.
Crabs, worms, cuttlefish, corals, insects. These creatures may not look alike or act alike, but they do share one thing in common. All of them are invertebrates, animals without backbones. Invertebrates inhabit every ecosystem, roaming every continent and swimming in every ocean. They comprise more than 90% of all living animals on Earth, outnumbering vertebrates almost 30 to 1. Ranging in size from tiny mites to giant squid, the diversity of this group is impressive. Having no backbone is something they have in common, but just because they're spineless doesn't mean they lack support. Many invertebrates, like this scorpion, rely on a hard external skeleton. Like a coat of armor, it frames and protects the body. Others depend on the pressure from fluids. Water fills the internal canals of this comb jelly. It keeps its shape at depths that would crush us. A sea anemone supports itself by circulating water through its soft body. Worms are held together by a tubular wall of muscle that surrounds their fluid-filled segments. The wall also helps them move. Evolution has provided invertebrates with some remarkable survival mechanisms. Here in the desert, freshwater fairy shrimp hatched from eggs that were dormant for as long as 25 years. The size of dust specks, the eggs miraculously came to life soon after a heavy rainfall. At another extreme, ice worms make special proteins that prevent deadly ice crystals from forming inside them. It's an odd place to live, yet they manage just fine. A few invertebrates can even regenerate vital parts. During a battle, this octopus loses an arm to a moray eel. But in a couple of months, another one will grow back. We may not realize it, but vertebrates like us owe a lot to the invertebrate world. Insects pollinate plants. Spiders kill unwanted pests. Worms add nutrients and air to the soil. And crustaceans like shrimp and crab are tasty to eat. The list goes on, and so do the wonders of these incredible animals.
Okay, so invertebrates are very important to us. Okay, so they play some pretty important roles for vertebrates. Okay, moving on. The first group that we're going to talk about of invertebrates are those that belong to the phylum Porifera. Okay, so Porifera, if you think of sponges, which is what we call these organisms, these are animals. You don't think of, not like the sponge that you have at home that you use to wipe up your countertop. That's not a real sponge. Those are artificial sponges. But a real sponge is from phylum Porifera. Okay, so this is our first group of invertebrates. So go ahead and look. You see, these are some examples over here. you see the inside of one, and then these are what are called collar cells that are actually important for pulling food into these organisms. These guys are stuck like plants. They can't move around, they're sessile, and so they have to somehow figure out how to get food in, and that's what these do. Since they can't go out and find their own food, they create sort of a current, and then these little tiny organisms are sucked in through these collar cells, and that's how they eat. Okay? So if we look, these are very simple animals. They cannot move, so they're sessile. Their body's a hollow tube, closed at the bottom, down here, open at the top. Most of them are asymmetric, so no real symmetry. They're different no matter how you look at them. Contains many small openings called pores, and that's why they named them porifera, because they have lots of pores. Water enters through this central cavity down through the top and through the pores, and then also out through the hole on the top. Sponges have these specialized cells for obtaining food, and that's what I was talking about here. These are sometimes called collar cells. They get their food from passing of water. So sometimes they're called filter feeders. So that's how they get their food, is they filter water, they filter the food particles out, and they also get their oxygen from the water. Because remember, water is H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. So that's how they get their water. There are saltwater sponges, and there are sponges that live in fresh water. So you can see them in two different locations.
In the survey of the animal kingdom that follows, we will begin with the phylum of sponges. Of all the animal phyla, sponges are considered to be the simplest, primarily because they do not have tissues and so lack nerves and muscles. As a result, sponges follow pretty uncomplicated lives attached to rocks and logs. The scientific name for the sponge phylum is Porifera, which means pore bearers. They were given this name because all sponges are perforated with countless tiny pores, and this is why their dried skeletons absorb water so well. Living sponges continually take water in through their pores and then expel it back outside through a much larger opening. During this process, called filter feeding, special cells inside the sponge's body trap tiny organisms that it uses for food.
Okay, so those are the filter feeders, or the porifera. The second group of invertebrates, the second phylum of invertebrates that we'll talk about, are the cnidarians. The C is silent. Okay, so instead of saying cnidarians or cnidarians, just leave it silent, and it is the cnidarians. So phylum Cnidaria. You've seen these before. Jellyfish would be a good example. Corals, sea anemones, these are all examples of organisms that are invertebrates and belong to the phylum Cnidaria. They have one body opening through which both food and waste pass. They have arms that extend from the middle body outwards, so they have radial symmetry. Okay, so they extend out from the middle. So you can see here, you can see here, they kind of extend out. Coral is a little different. Most of these live in salt water, but some can live in fresh water. They're a little bit more complex than the sponges or the porifera, and they do have a digestive cavity where food is broken down. They have a very simple nervous system, not like our nervous system where we have a brain and a spinal cord. They have what they call a nerve net, and that allows them to respond to things in their environment and also to get them to move. Most of them have arm-like tentacles called, or arm-like structures called tentacles, and they use those to help them move and also to catch prey. And then they have stinging cells on them. So cnidarians, usually we associate stinging cells with these organisms in this particular phylum. They get oxygen by absorbing it right through their cells. And again, examples, jellyfish, corals, sea anemones.
The second simplest phylum of animals are the stinging animals. These beautiful creatures include jellyfish, corals, and sea anemones. Like sponges, all stinging animals live in water, but they are much more complex than sponges and have two basic tissue layers. They are called stinging animals because they have stinging cells on their tentacles, which they use for defense, for trapping prey, and taking it into their mouths. Food is digested in a large cavity inside their bodies, and waste materials are expelled back to the outside through their mouths. Another unusual thing about the stinging animals is that they have a circular or radial body plan, in which the segments are arranged like spokes of a wheel. So although they have an upside and a downside, they have no front or back. Nearly all stinging animals exhibit two distinct life forms. Most sea anemones, corals, and jellyfish spend part of their lives attached to solid objects as muscular tubes called polyps, and during the other part of their lives, the same individuals are able to swim freely as umbrella-shaped medusae, like those seen here.
Okay, so cnidarians. We'll come back to this. Go ahead and look at it and see if you can figure out what would go where. So which of these would be examples of sponges, phylum Porifera, and which would be examples of cnidarians, phylum Cnidaria. Again, we've got some things for you to figure out. You'll see this on your review. Moving on to segmented worms, the third phylum. This phylum is called Annelida, or annelids. Okay, so you have all seen earthworms, especially after a big rain. They come out and you see them crawling around maybe on your sidewalk. These are basically just long tubes. That's what a worm is. They have long tube-like bodies. They can be, sometimes these are divided into little segments. And when I say segments, I'm talking about these little parts here. When you look at it, it looks like they're just kind of like Lego bricks stuck together. Those would be like segments here. Okay, so you've got segmented worms. You can cut them in half and they would be bilaterally symmetrical, so you would have basically the same thing one side and the other. They're the simplest organisms with a true nervous system, and they have blood within their blood vessels. They have a brain, very small one, but a brain in the front segment, and they have a very long digestive tube that runs the entire length of the worm's body. Basically, what they do is as they crawl through the soil goes in through their head region, and then anything that's in that soil that they can digest, they do. Anything that can't be digested comes out the other end. Okay, so they take in soil and water through their mouth, and anything that it can't use goes right out the back. So they have a separate opening for taking food in and getting rid of waste. Worms take in dissolved oxygen from water, and also it goes right through their skin. Some of them live on land, some in water. Examples that you'd be familiar with would include earthworms, leeches, marine worms. Those would all be worms that would belong in this phylum.
After the stinging animals, the next most complex group are the worms, and there are about 7 different phyla of them. The very simplest worms are called flatworms. Most of them live in the oceans, but some live inside of other animals where they are dangerous parasites. Flatworms possess 3 basic tissue layers, a primitive nervous system, and a single body opening through which pass both food and wastes. All the other phyla of worms, such as the large marine worm seen here, possess a digestive tube that runs through a fluid-filled body cavity called a coelom. The digestive tube begins at the mouth and ends at a second opening, the anus, through which wastes are expelled. Although some worms use gills for obtaining oxygen, most simply absorb it through their moist skins. Earthworms, like those seen here, are members of the most advanced phylum of worms, called the segmented worms, because their bodies are composed of repeating ring-like segments. Earthworms feed off of decaying organic material in the soil. They have both brains and blood, as well as a number of simple organ systems.
Okay, so phylum Annelid are the segmented worms. Again, going back to looking at radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry, and asymmetrical organisms or shapes. In this case, they're just common everyday items. So look at these and see if you can figure out which goes in which of these boxes. You can stop the video at this time and make these on your paper and just kind of draw them in if you'd like. Just write the words where they belong. Here's another example where you can practice: sponges, cnidarians, worms. So try to put these in the right place. And one more, dealing with characteristics from each of these three phyla. The fourth phylum that we'll talk about are the mollusks, and this is phylum Mollusca. These organisms have soft bodies. Most of them have one or two shells. They show bilateral symmetry. Most of them have what's called a muscular foot for movement. So sometimes they're called stomach-footed animals because their foot extends out from their stomach area. They have a little bit more developed nervous systems than the sponges or the worms. They have a mouth for obtaining food and a separate exit for waste products. Most of them live on land, but some can live in water. They do have a heart and they have a circulatory system, and they take in oxygen either through gills or lungs. Some examples you might be familiar with: slugs, snails, clams, octopus. Okay, those are all examples of soft-bodied organisms belonging to phylum Mollusca.
After the worm phyla, the next most complex group of organisms are the mollusks, the soft-bodied animals. Two of the most advanced mollusks are the octopus and the cuttlefish. Both live in salt water and are considered to be highly intelligent animals. The snail seen here is a fairly typical mollusk. It has three basic tissue layers, a coelom, and well-developed organ systems. The snail's head and sense organs are connected directly to the large muscular foot it uses for locomotion. Many of their internal organs are located within their shells, but in times of danger, there is still enough room inside their shells for the rest of their body. Snails and slugs possess a rough, rasp-like feeding tongue to shred plant material before it is ingested. Snails are also hermaphrodites, meaning they possess both male and female reproductive organs. Nonetheless, they still seek out mates to fertilize their eggs.
Okay, so phylum Mollusca are the soft-bodied organisms. We'll come back. Same here. Arthropods. You're familiar with this one. The term arthropod means jointed foot, and the phylum name is Arthropoda. Jointed foot. So these organisms have joints. Okay, they have, just kind of like we have joints, but they have joints as well. They have segmented bodies. Some of them have wings, but not all. And generally they show bilateral symmetry. A lot of times they have a hard outer shell called an exoskeleton. We have an endoskeleton inside our body. Their skeleton is on the outside of their body, and that's what gives them a nice crunch when you step on them. Some live on land and some live in water. They have a digestive system with 2 openings, a nervous system and a skeletal system. They use specialized mouth parts and pincers to help them get their food. Usually they get their oxygen from the air through gills or what are called air tubes. Examples are insects, arachnids, spiders, and crustaceans. Okay, so crabs, lobster, things of that nature. Those are all arthropods.
The next phylum, the arthropods, or joint-legged animals, is the largest animal phylum. In fact, there are more species of arthropods than are found in all the other phyla combined. Some of the most familiar arthropods are spiders, bees, ants, and butterflies. All arthropods share the same characteristics. They all have paired jointed appendages, such as legs, antennae, and mouth parts. The bodies of all arthropods possess a hard outer covering called an exoskeleton that provides protection for their internal organs and gives the ends of their muscles a place to attach. The muscles of arthropods are highly efficient, and they have extremely well-developed sense organs. They have both simple and compound eyes for obtaining visual information, and antennae to give them information about touch sensations, odors, tastes, and even sounds. One reason that arthropods have been such a successful group of animals is that they have efficient methods for reproduction, in which fertilization occurs inside the body of the female.
Okay. So arthropods are the joint-footed organisms with exoskeletons, which makes them crunchy. We'll go through that, and we'll go to the echinoderms, phylum Echinoderma. These are the ones that we call spiny skin. Okay, so echinoderm is from the Greek words echinos, meaning spiny, and derma, meaning skin. They have arms that extend outward from the middle of their body, so this is radial symmetry. Okay, so radial symmetry. They have a water vascular system that allows them to move. They take in oxygen, capture food, and release wastes. They have what are called tube feet. On the bottom of this sea star, you'll see little tiny tube feet that they use to take in oxygen from the water, and it helps them to move. They have one opening for their mouth, taking in food, and they use that same opening to get rid of their waste. They don't have a head or a brain, but they do have what's called a nerve ring, which is underneath here, surrounds the mouth. They have spines for protection. Examples would be sea stars, brittle stars, sea cucumbers, and sea urchins. Okay, so most of these organisms do live in the ocean.
Biologists think that mollusks, segmented worms, and arthropods followed one major path of evolutionary development, while a much different path was followed by the last invertebrate group we will look at, the spiny-skinned animals, or echinoderms. All echinoderms, such as starfish, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers, dwell in salt water. Echinoderms possess calcium-containing spines that link together to form an internal framework called an endoskeleton. They also possess a unique system that pumps water through canals inside their bodies. This system is used to control the thousands of tiny tube feet, seen here, which echinoderms use for both locomotion and for prying open the shells of mollusks, such as clams and oysters, upon which they feed.
Okay, so echinoderms. These are the spiny-skinned organisms. Okay, so we have 6 different groups: Porifera, Cnidarian, Mollusca, Echinodermata, Arthropoda, and the annelids for the segmented worms. You'll be able to match these up, hopefully, during your review. More review for symmetry, asymmetric, bilateral symmetry, and radial symmetry. And that's it. Okay, so that concludes our notes on invertebrates.